Verim, you may be seated. About a year ago, last fall, as part of a class that I taught, I had the opportunity to look at various artistic representations of some very powerful biblical scenes, and two of them were in this week's Parashat. I only want to focus, however, on the story of the banishment of Hagar and Ishmael. And so I have for you four of the representations that we studied. And for anybody who wants to take a quick reference, it's page 114 in our Chumashim, beginning with verse 9 at the very top of the page. But as you receive these, I want you to look at the artistic representations. I haven't given you the names of the artists or what year these things were done, because for our purposes this morning, I don't care about any of that. The only thing I will note is that if you look at them, you'll see that the three painted versions are sort of an era themselves, and the sculpture, which is a life-size sculpture, was done in the 1960s or 70s. So other than that, it's the most contemporary of them, but look at the way all the various characters are depicted, and then we'll have some fun, and hopefully you remember what the story that we just read. Moment. And if you studied this with me in a year ago and you still remember some of it, so what strikes you about these representations of this is literally the moment when Hagar is being and Ishmael are being sent away from the house of Abraham. Literally, this is that traumatic moment. Jumps out at you at these. If I was prone to be a medieval biblical commentator, I'd say, also, what's wrong with this picture? Bogey. Okay. Because what's our young man doing? Oh, he's holding his bow and arrow, and he's pointing it actually at people. Right now, understand that one of the things that we're told in our story is that he becomes a particularly adept a fellow with the bow and arrow. That becomes one of his defining attributes, so that he's had the skill set as a child is not surprising. The disturbing part is where he's pointing. So yes, right? What else jumps out? Yes, Joe. Okay. Yes, you get a much more expanded family dynamic, which includes somewhat the reaction of the children. Okay. Yes. Why not? Why do you think not? So who's hugging in the picture? Maybe the brothers. Yes, he's very and sometimes very central. Okay. Um, so yeah, please. Abraham is the big rock. Interesting. Why do you say that? Uh, remember, this is art. You can say whatever you think it means, and the artist no longer has any control over what we say. Okay, well, that's what? Maybe, or maybe it represents what is a rock? It's solid, foundational, with also um, emotionless. Avram, we know, reacts very negatively initially, and God says, just do it. Listen to Sarah and do it. And maybe the rock represents how Abraham has stoically steeled himself for this moment. Mark, and then our guest. Sorry, I don't know your name yet. So, Mark. Okay. This is one of those few times where I have to say, no, I think you're wrong. Um, because if you look at the figure in the front, you can see that on the side she has a satchel, which conforms with what the text tells us, that Abraham took a satchel with water and bread and put it on her shoulder. Hagar in this is in the foreground here. She is yes, she's got her back to everything, but there's a figure in the background, and that's Sarah. So Hagar here is turning her back on Sarah and turning her back on Abraham, whether Abraham is the rock or the second person embracing here, right? Yes, sir. That's certainly a good piece of advice. um, okay. So now I want to complicate life a little bit. Right? I want to complicate your life a smidge. At the end of Parshat Lech Lecha, which is the Torah portion immediately of last week, Ishmael, we're told, is 13 years old, right? At the beginning of this Torah portion, the angelic guests tell Sarah, a year from now, you're going to have a child. And then fast forward, we're told that there's a great celebration when Isaac is weaned, right? So he's got to be 2 years old, 3 years old. All right. So 13 plus 1 plus 3 makes Yishmael about 16 years old. Okay. Look at the pictures. In all of the paintings, he is not 16. He's much younger. If anything, in in the two on the left-hand side, he and Isaac and Ishmael appear roughly the same age. Right? So it's a little problematic. On the other hand, the text sort of suggests that Hagar carries Yishmael during parts of this departure, which, if he is in fact 16 years old, that's a daunting task for her. Okay, that can be true for certain things, especially in the pre-Abrahamic reality. But once we get into the patriarchal narratives, a year is kind of a year. Uh, and even if you want to foreshorten it a little bit, you can't have two children born 16 seasons, 16 something apart, be the same. It's right. So the artists are either a little unaware of the timeline, or they've chosen to ignore it, because by making the children sort of co-equal in age, it enables them to be playmates with each other, right? And sort of it, but it also raises the question of, so if Ishmael is 14 or 15 years older than his brother, he's both in a position to be influential, and he's also in a position to be almost irrelevant, because he's not part of the household the same way anymore. I remember years ago, I had one of my closest friends in high school had two brothers, except I only knew about one of them, because I discovered very much after we'd known each other for a long period of time that he had a second brother. Why? One of his brothers was 9 years older than him, and the other one was 18 years older than he was. And so he was off at college when my friend Howie was in diapers. I never met him. And my friend Howie never talked about him, because they had minimal interaction and engagement. So on one level, big older brother influence, no influence. And I think the farther apart they are, you have to figure out which of those paths you're going to follow. And that sort of then brings us to the last, to the sculpture, where, oh, it doesn't look Abraham because it's too young. On the other hand, what has the sculptor done? He's made the brothers the same age, except now the 13-year gap has gone in the other directions. Instead of making Yishmael young, he's made Yitzchak older, so that they are again sort of equal partners. Ron. Yeah, go ahead. Well, I would say that, if you're going to start talking about attire, remember that in the paintings, they're all dressed in medieval attire, which would have been inaccurate as well. So I would ignore some of the blue jean stuff, other than that was reality for George Siegel, who was the artist. But yes, Hagar in this one is innocent. She is the one who has been acted upon mostly by Sarah. It's Sarah's idea that Hagar be brought into the family mixture in order to help solve a problem of barrenness that she's experiencing. She's so Hagar is very much the the person in the white cowboy hat, if you will. And Sarah, who's in the background, is very much depicted darkly. And in the painting on the bottom left, that's a pretty stern expression on her face. Hey, the woman's 100-something years old. Give her a little credit. We should look that good at 100-something. It's the beard. Okay, Martha. No, it's an intriguing question, and I guess modern biblical scholars would always ask that question, but we're left then to answer a basic question, which is, if I'm the redactor of the Bible, if I'm the one who's aggregating material and choosing what to include and what to exclude, why do I include the story of Ishmael at all? I mean, there's great literary tension that's created, but why do I include Ishmael as Abraham's firstborn? Well, no, it's the story because the author of the redactor of the Bible gave it to us. Now, on one level, it fits a motif of the older is always rejected in favor of the younger. So I need an older sibling to Isaac to be cast aside. Abraham is not the eldest. Yitzchak is not the eldest. Jacob's not the eldest. It's always, that's King David is not. All right, that's a model and a motif. So maybe I include the story of his birth in order for him to be dismissed. Therefore, if he's around, I have to exit him from the stage in the same way that Abraham thinks Lot's going to be, his nephew is going to be his successor. And no, we got to take Lot off the stage. Just as a footnote, we forget about the fact that after Sarah dies, Abraham remarries and has 5 more kids, all of whom he sets up in a very nice condo in the wilderness, and they're set for life, but they're exited from the stage. Arnie. Because Jacob doesn't know. Jacob doesn't know that he's going to be the inheritor. We know it because we've been paying attention to the rejection of the elder story. From what Jacob knows, standard operating procedure throughout the ancient world is the oldest child gets the birthright and the double portion and all the good stuff. And Jacob was going like, oh, I have a window of opportunity here to grab something from my brother that is his. Jacob's not a good guy in this story. Well, I think we got to parse that out a little bit because um, Rivka definitely favors Jacob over Esau. But here you've got two different mothers involved, so it's a more complicated story. Uh, Well, we don't know which one. I mean, Abraham, and there's a great midrash where which talks about builds up on the story that that Abraham is told, "Tachna et bincha, take your son," and Abraham says to God, "I got two sons, et et yichidcha, the solo one." So no, this one's solo, solo to his mom. This one's solo to his mom. You're not helping me. Asher Ahavta, the one that you love. And he's going, what are you talking about? I love both of my sons. And then it says, Et Yitzchak. Right? No, I mean Isaac. Why? Because the story only works after Yishmael has been banished. Right? That's why it becomes attention. Okay, Chaverim, the hour's growing late, so let's save the continued conversation for Kiddush, and let me invite you to turn back to your Sidurim, and we'll continue with the Chatzi Kaddish in the middle of page 184. But I just, as a closing note, artists in their own way are no less biblical commentators, even if they don't think of themselves that way, because they are graphically interpreting the text that we sort of pour over and try to understand as well as we can. And whether we're left with who's hugging who. What's the dynamic between the children? We can imagine that we know that the dynamic between Sarah and Hagar was not good. And maybe because the brothers were particularly close, that creates concern for her. So there's just a lot to parse.